Okay. So I'm actually talking about a site that's not in Ireland at all. It's actually in North Wales, as you can see there from the picture on the bottom left. This is the location of the internment camp, where around 1600, 1700 Irish men were interned in the aftermath of the 1916 Rising. And I'll just point out here South Camp and North Camp. We'll come back to those a little bit later on. But you might be able to see, I suppose, at least initially, that the location of North Camp, which is one area where the internment camp was set up, is now a grassy field. On South Camp, there's actually now a primary school. So in terms of what's left there, there's not a lot of above ground remains. Now, Frongoch internment camp is really significant in the history of the Irish revolutionary period for various reasons. Firstly, it's the location where the much more effective tactics of guerrilla warfare that were deployed during the War of Independence were developed and honed by people like Michael Collins. It also, I suppose, it was in some senses a bit of a mistake on the part of the British government to throw all these Irish revolutionaries together, because the experience of internment, I suppose, really strengthened people's resolve. It also strengthened a sense of collective identity and experience in what, up to the point of the 1916 Rising, had been quite disparate groups. There'd been quite a lot of differences between the various different groups involved in the Rising in terms of their particular politics and background. But being interned together really gave a very strong sense of identity and purpose. And here, in fact, you can see this, if we go back to our previous slide, on the location of the school that's there now, the South Camp, the internees were housed in what had been a Victorian whiskey distillery. That doesn't survive anymore. Here's a lovely little painting from one of the autograph books. So quite a lot of really wonderful autograph books, both in private collections, also in the National Museum. A lot of the ones in the National Museum have been scanned and are actually available to the public to take a look at on the Digital Repository of Ireland website. So you can see quite a lot of these, and these wonderful little line drawings and watercolors of the camp. So this is the South Camp in the whiskey distillery. This is the North Camp, where that field, which is currently just a field, nice grassy field, was originally full of standard issue wooden British Army barracks huts, which have now all gone. So I suppose that, well, we started out with a bit of geophysical survey in 2015, and we have undertaken 3 seasons, short seasons, of archaeological survey and excavation at Frongoch in the last few years. So first in 2015, when we did some survey, then 2016, and then in 2019, just before the pandemic. And the geophysical survey in the first instance was, it was reasonably, moderately productive. The gradiometry survey was more productive than the resistivity survey. This is the gradiometry survey up here, and you can see these large bipolar anomalies, which we think might indicate the location of metal stoves, big cast iron stoves within individual huts. You might just about be able to make out these kind of rectilinear features, which we think probably relate to hut foundations. And you can see those in the resistivity as well. The resistivity wasn't terribly productive because it's actually a very, very boggy, damp field. The other thing you can see here is this little line of pits to this side of the camp, which we think may be latrine pits. There was a wash house and a cookhouse in that area of the camp. Sorry. Okay, so in 2015, alongside the survey, one of the things we wanted to do was really establish good links with the local community. And we were able to talk to people about what they might have uncovered over the years in that field and neighboring areas. The farmer who, the field where North Camp was originally located hasn't actually been, I think it's been ploughed once, I think, during the course of the many decades since 1916. So the archaeology, as we'll see a little bit later on, is quite well preserved. That means that there hasn't been much by way of artifacts recovered by the farmer, but the odd one or two over the years he has kept, including this large piece of ironwork that you can see here, which probably was originally part of a stove of the sort that you can see down here. The other really lovely item that we were shown by a man who lived just off the side of the location of North Camp and who had been building a conservatory at the back of his house a number of years ago. And when the builders were in, they had discovered this little musical instrument. And initially, myself and my colleague, Gary from University of Bangor, with whom I'm doing this project, initially we thought that this might have belonged to German internees, because after the Irish internees were released around Christmas of 1916, they were there from about May 1916 through to about December 1916. Though some of them were released a little bit earlier. And then there were German internees brought into the camp. And we knew from documentary sources that the German internees had an orchestra with instruments provided by the Red Cross. So our initial assumption was that this is, maybe it belonged to one of the German internees. But then my colleague Gary brought it into the music department in his university in Bangor, and a specialist in the music department actually identified it as an early 19th century Irish fife. A fife is a form of flute, essentially. So this probably does indeed relate to the Irish internees. And you can imagine this was, this is something that somebody had either brought with them or sent to them. And the fact that it's an old object suggests that maybe this is something that someone had in his family. It could have been even a family heirloom. So really lovely little finds like that. I mentioned that the camp itself doesn't survive, the buildings of the camp itself don't survive, but there is some standing archaeology that still exists. For example, the footings of a bridge to cross this little stream that you can see here in the background and on the map. And this was used by internees to move from the site of the distillery across to a recreation field. So this is where they did their recreation. Which became known as, this field came to be known as Croke Park. And in fact, the internees did a lot of Gaelic athletics, hurling and football. And it was the location of their All-Ireland All-Ireland football final in 1916. It was Louth versus Kerry. And I think Kerry won by a single point. Sorry, any Louth people out there. And just here you can see a few people standing at the edge of the recreation field in one of these lovely little autograph books, and you can see the distillery there behind them of South Camp. North Camp, as I say, was mostly these kind of lovely, well, these standard issue British barracks huts. Mistakenly said lovely, they're actually cold and drafty and not a great place to be spending time in. We know what they looked like because, again, the internees drew these and painted these lovely pictures in their autograph books. And actually in 2015, we were lucky enough to find an original hut from the camp down the road. The huts had been dismantled and sold off more or less immediately after the end of the First World War in 2019. So most of them don't survive any longer, of course, but this one does. And it was really amazing to come across it. And you can see that it really is pretty much exactly as it shows in the picture. And we were lucky enough to be able to ask colleagues in the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales to come out and do a proper drawn survey of this building. So it's been recorded, properly archaeologically recorded. And in fact, the local community in Frongoch itself are hoping in the medium term to be able to purchase and relocate the hut back to its original location in Frongoch village. Inside the hut was really fantastic because you could see little features, architectural features that actually mapped directly, fitted directly with what we know from contemporary line drawings. You can see this lovely interior drawing actually from Sean O'Mahony's, reproducing Sean O'Mahony's book on Frongoch, and it shows these little coat hooks, and of course the windows, these kind of up frame, these windows that open at the top, and you can see exactly the same features and exactly the same windows inside the hut. And even more poignantly, we found 2 of these benches, which we think are definitely original to the hut and would have been sat on by internees back in 2016. And the reason we think that is because they're a very distinctive kind of design. You can see on the line drawing down here is a couple of these guys sitting on exactly just such a bench. So in 2016, 2019, we opened up a number of trenches to look at the archaeology. And this is really amazing because, well, as I said, the field has only been ploughed once. The stratigraphy is very thin, as you can see. Essentially, you peel off the turf, the layer of turf at the top, and lo and behold, there's the archaeology all kind of laid out in front of you, which is really fantastic. And there's me looking a bit muddy next to a Californian student who'd only ever dug in the desert before. So he was finding it a bit of a shock to the system to be digging in damp and muddy North Wales, as you can probably see from his face. So I suppose one of the really fantastic things, although it was wonderful to find the archaeology, for myself and my Bangor colleagues, I think the really lovely experience of excavating at Frongoch in 2016 and then in 2019 was that we actually dug with descendants of internees, including 2 older gentlemen who were sons of internees. So really, really fantastic, wonderful to hear their stories. And also grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So that was a fantastic experience. So we're able to hear the experiences of their family members. And in fact, even in our small number of volunteers, there were actually 2 volunteers whose relatives had actually been interned in the same hut in North Camp, which was really, really fantastic. So I think, you know, I guess for me, normally working in the Bronze Age, when you're working with people who have this incredible, you know, physical, personal sense of identity with this site, you know, that it just comes alive in a way that, you know, reading a history book doesn't. So for these people to be able to get involved in this way was really, really special, I think, both for them and for us as well. So to talk about the archaeology briefly, so some of the things we found included pathways built by the internees. I mentioned already that the field is very damp and boggy, and that's a feature in a lot of the internees' personal accounts. So they built pathways. The Irish internees built these with gravel chippings from a nearby quarry, and also cinders, waste materials from those stoves that I mentioned earlier. The German internees then came along a little bit later, and they actually resurfaced the pathways with river cobbles from the river which runs just down here off the edge of the site. And excavating these pathways, you could actually see the stratigraphy. So you could distinguish the Irish paths from the German paths, which was really amazing. We also found the footings of one building, at least. So you can see here kind of stone footings. There was a concrete pad here, you can see with a hole in it for a post to timber upright, various areas of burnt stone and clinker, again, this kind of waste material from the stoves, a large piece of metal. So we think this was, again, probably part of a stove, a former stove. And we suspect that this building that we found here is probably this building here, a cookhouse. As I mentioned earlier, there was a cookhouse and wash house in this part of the camp, and we think we've found the part of that cookhouse there. There were a huge amount of finds. For somebody who's a prehistorian, I'm used to finding virtually nothing when I excavate. It was amazing to find. It's such a material wealth of artifacts from the site, so a whole range of different things. From nails, which I suppose speak of those timber huts. The wooden panels were held together by nails, and of course then they were dismantled on the spot at the end of the war to be sold off. Bits of barbed wire, as you can see here, which I suppose speak very poignantly to the experience of imprisonment and internment. Lots of glass, so window glass from the huts themselves, bottle glass of various different types and colors, very thin glass that we think could well have been glass from picture frames. You can imagine that, would have been really important for people to maintain that sense of connection with their loved ones back home. Lots of different types of ceramics. So you can see sort of blue and white ceramics, white standard issue British Army crockery as well, earthenwares, which were probably used to bring food into the camp for the internees, and occasional other objects like this little button cover, not very well preserved, unfortunately, so we don't know what sort of button it was. And some even more exciting finds. We have several pieces of medicine bottles, and we know that the experience of internment actually really badly affected the health of quite a few of the internees because the conditions were, well, the food was poor and the conditions, as I've already mentioned, were cold and damp and so on. So there is, I suppose, material evidence of this element of the internees' experience there in terms of these distinctive blue glass medicine bottles. Also other things, I suppose being interned was incredibly boring. The internees did organize all sorts of classes and in various different subjects, ranging from stenography to Irish, and obviously they did a lot of sports. I mentioned the football and hurling earlier, but you can imagine there was a lot of smoking as well happening. So this is a piece of a clay pipe. Let's see if I can get my cursor back. No, there we are. So this is a piece of clay pipe, pipe stem, which actually has a maker's name on it. I haven't managed to track down the maker yet, so I don't know if it's a pipe that somebody brought with them from Ireland, but we did find various bits of clay pipe. And then this wonderful object, this is actually the top part of a boot or shoe, leather boot or shoe, which you can see here. And I suppose finding this again was, a very powerful moment, when you find something that's so, of a person, that's really incredible. And actually, when we came across it, it was literally sticking up out of the ground, like somebody's foot sticking up out of the ground. The person obviously wasn't there, nor the rest of the shoe, but it was really, a powerful thing to find just there. And then I suppose the last thing really want to I suppose finish up with is the significance of the site today. When myself and my Bangor colleagues initially went to look at the site, we weren't really sure, we didn't know what the local community felt about the site. We knew that the site was marked by a plaque. We didn't know whether the local community would be interested or how they would feel about it. The Frongoch was the location where the IRA was formed, for example. So it does have political resonances that I suppose we felt might have been viewed as problematic. But in actual fact, in North Wales, as probably some of the audience will know, it's a very Welsh nationalist community, and in fact, Welsh is the native tongue. You go into the shops there, in the school, everybody's speaking Welsh. So in fact, the local community are really interested in and really sympathetic towards the history and the experiences of the internees in the camp at Frongoch. And the people living in the village are really aware of what happened here, and very interested in hosting Irish visitors who come through now and then. And there were a whole series of commemorative events in 2016, over the course of 2016. And in fact, these flagpoles, as you can see here, were erected, and these wreaths were laid by various visiting groups of Irish people in 2016. And you can see BBC News down here, Easter Rising Centenary to be marked, etc. And that school I showed you earlier, that's on the South Camp, the location of the South Camp now, little primary school. The children were all doing projects in the run up to the centenary. So they made this little model of the camp that you can see here. It's really wonderful. And then there were a whole host of centenary events marking the 100th anniversary of the arrival of the internees in May, which were very interesting in themselves, actually. So I suppose the local government in that part of Wales had attempted to some extent, they were trying to depoliticize this to some extent. And they had instructed some local Welsh nationalist groups that they were not to march. But these Welsh nationalist groups made the decision that they would march, and they had a marching band, and as you can see, lots of banners and flags and so on there as well. But the local kind of organizing committee held various speeches. They had the Irish ambassador up from London, they had a local historian, they had various other people taking to the stage. And although they had asked this particular current Welsh nationalist group not to speak, or had not given them the platform, that group actually took the platform themselves after the formal speeches were finished. So it's still a very kind of evocative and contested location in some respects in the present, which makes it all the more interesting and engaging a location to work. And then just finally, I suppose, you've seen various lovely little watercolor drawings, contemporary watercolor drawings from 1916 over the course of this talk. One of our volunteers who came out with us in 2019, the son of a man who'd actually been in the Stephen's Green garrison and had subsequently been interned. He painted this lovely little watercolor of us there digging. This is our trench, our excavation trench, and our various excavators and our spoil heap and our wheelbarrow and our buckets and so on. So this reminds me that hopefully in the future we'll continue excavating. As I say, the day job is in the Bronze Age, so I don't get much time to indulge in my side interest. But it's fantastic when I do get out there with my Bangor colleagues, and we certainly hope to get back there sometime in the not too distant future. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully stop recording as well. There we are. Lovely.